Okay, everybody, I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Alex Jacob. I work with the Church's Ministry among Jewish people, and I've been invited to speak here at Haverhill West End Congregational Church over these 2 weeks. I spoke last week and I introduced Romans chapter 1, gave a context to Paul's letter to the Romans, and also looked at the first 7 verses. And in this second session, we're going to be looking at verse 8 down to verse 17 of chapter 1. So if you haven't heard the first talk, the first sermon, you may want to hear that first, which will give a context to what I want to say this morning to you. So let me just read to you from verse 8 of chapter 1. Again, if you've got your Bibles with you, it's good to follow. Sometimes there's slight differences in the translation, but I'm going to read from the New International Version. And here we have Romans 1, beginning at verse 8. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve with my whole heart in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray that now at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have among the other Gentiles. I am bound both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. This is why I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are at Rome. I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For in the gospel a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. So those are the verses from Romans chapter 1, verses 8 down to 17. So as we look at those verses, the first thing which kind of comes to my attention from that is in verse 8, where Paul begins with this sense of thankfulness. He's heard about the faith of this new community of followers of Jesus in Rome, and he's heard about the way in which the work has grown in the very center of the Roman Empire. And he's very thankful for them and for their community. And he's offering prayers of thankfulness for them. And I think this is an important principle in Paul's writing and in Paul's prayers, that often there is a focus on thankfulness. I think often as Christians, we kind of focus on prayers being primarily intercession or confession. And those aspects of prayer are really, really important. But maybe we're good to remind ourselves from time to time of the importance of praise and thankfulness in our prayers as well. Now, for many people, the last year or so has been a particularly challenging and difficult time. But it's good, isn't it, even in these difficult times, to kind of be conscious before God of the things we are thankful for. And maybe, to make a list of those things, and maybe to turn that list into a prayer of thankfulness over the next few weeks would be a really good kind of spiritual discipline for some of us. So Paul begins with this sense of thankfulness. And then as you go down in verse 9, he talks about, serving God with his whole heart. Another translation talks about, I serve in my spirit. In other words, what the essence of this verse is that Paul is deeply committed in his spirit, with the whole of his heart. He's deeply committed to the work which God is calling him to, the work as an apostle to the Gentiles and also as a prophet back into the community of Israel. And I think this is a challenge to all of us. It's certainly a challenge to me, that I think, the tendency sometimes with our Christian commitment and whatever role we have within the life of the church, is sometimes we kind of get stuck in doing things out of a sense of routine, or a sense of kind of misplaced duty. And some of the joy and thankfulness of that service begins to evaporate. And we do things maybe in a kind of half-hearted way. So there's a real challenge there, from Paul. Lord, please help me. Whatever I'm called to do in the life of the church, may I do it with a wholeheartedness. May I do it in the power of your Spirit. May it be, coming from within my own personal commitments. So Lord, help me to be wholehearted for you. And then in verse 10 to 11, we pick up this idea that Paul is longing to visit the community in Rome. We know that he's planned many times during his missionary journeys to go to Rome, but for a range of reasons, that has not happened. But the fact that that hasn't happened has not reduced or diminished his desire, his intention to go to Rome. He's not sidetracked. He's not put off by those disappointments. He still very much wants to go to Rome. And what I think is really amazing here is that in wanting to go to Rome, he's wanting to share with them, the passion he has for the gospel. He wants to share with them the teaching he has to give as an apostle. But he's also wanting to receive from them. As we said last week, he wants to receive their support in order to use Rome as a kind of catalyst, a stepping stone for his work later on in Spain. So he's wanting to sort of, partner with them in that new missionary endeavor. But he's also wanting to learn from them. He says in verse 11, I want us to be mutually encouraged by this encounter. And I think in a sense that shows kind of Paul's humility. He is the great missionary, the great theologian, yet he's coming to this embryonic church in Rome, but he's also realizing that the believers there have things to teach him, things to share with him, things to encourage him with. And I think that's really that kind of humility, the willingness to keep on learning, keep on receiving, it is really important. In my work with the church's ministry among Jewish people, we have reached out to the Jewish community for over 200 years in many, many different settings. And we've given and we've taught and we've shared a lot. But I think also we have received such a lot. We've received so many insights, so many blessings from the Jewish community in partnership with us in different ways over the years. So I think this idea of being mutually encouraged by the work we're doing with people is an important kind of principle. I think sometimes in a church setting, people get stuck in certain roles they do. I often feel when I was pastoring a church, I've done that for 21 years before I started working with CMJ. But I think often in a church setting, certain people take on certain roles, and certain people are seen in the church as the givers. They're the ones who are sort of doing the work, they're giving out, they're offering pastoral care. So they are the givers. And there's other people who are perhaps more the receivers, people in need, people who are perhaps more fragile in their faith or in their life circumstances. So there's givers and receivers. Certain people are very dependent, other people are very independent. But I think in a healthy church, those kind of clear demarcation between givers and receivers become blended. We all can give, we can all receive. And, if you're the leader, at times you have to be vulnerable and admit your needs. You have to be prepared to receive from others. And if you're kind of on the receiving end, sometimes you have to step up. We can all give, whatever our resources are. Don't simply become dependent on others, but also try and serve and find your unique contribution to the life of the church. So that idea of being kind of mutually encouraged, mutually responsible, sharing in the participation as fully as possible seems to me to be a very important point. And then Paul is saying he wants to come to Rome to be mutually encouraged, but also, to share the gospel. There's an eagerness there, which Paul speaks about, an eagerness to share. And he then goes on to talk about, how he sees the gospel. And perhaps verse 16 is in many ways, the key verse in this section. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it's the power of God. The power to transform lives is not in the witness of the community of the church. The church doesn't kind of change lives. The church can help and support and be a channel for the gospel. But the power is not in the church community in that sense. The power is not in Paul, even that he is a great anointed apostle. He has an incredible testimony of the transformation of Jesus in his own life. All those things are important. But the power is not in Paul. It's not in the church. It's in the gospel. It's in the good news of Jesus Christ. And the power, the word in the Greek is dunamis. It's the word in which we get the English word dynamite. In other words, the gospel is explosive. It can break down, it can break open the strongholds in people's lives. It can break open the strongholds of the Roman Empire. The gospel is powerful. It's like the most powerful dynamite. Handle with care. This is the power of God to change lives and to change society. There's something incredible here, and Paul understands it's the power of God. And it's the power of God for everyone. It says here, the salvation of everyone who believes. And I think this is really important, that when we're looking at Paul's letters, when we're looking at the mission of the church, that the church is inclusive. The church reaches out beyond any of the human constructs, any of the human barriers we put in place. So the gospel is for men and women. The gospel is for adults and children. The gospel is for every racial group. The gospel is for poor and rich. The gospel can reach into every sector, every part of community life. And we have here the gospel begins almost exclusively in a Jewish context in Jerusalem. And throughout the book of Acts and throughout the letters of Paul, you can begin to see how this gospel message begins to enlarge beyond the Jewish context into a mainly Gentile and pagan context. So the gospel, Paul says, the New Testament puts into practice, is for everyone. So if you're hearing this and perhaps you're new to church, or perhaps you feel you don't quite fit in with the kind of normal church person, be sure at this point, the gospel is fully for you. If anybody excludes you from receiving the good news of Jesus, they are doing something which is fundamentally unbiblical. The gospel is for everyone. And I think it's that universal nature of the gospel which has inspired mission work throughout the centuries. People have gone out, beginning from Jerusalem, and have gone out to their communities and to the ends of the earth with the good news of Jesus. So there's something universal, and that's really, really important. And I think every church which has a missionary heart is very keen and very good on sharing the universal nature of the gospel. No one is beyond the reach of God and the transforming power of the gospel. But Paul also says here, the gospel is for everyone who believes, first for the Jew. There's a priority of mission to the Jewish community. And if you look in the New Testament, there are lots of reasons for that. I mean, Jesus himself said salvation is from the Jews in John chapter 4. So there is this priority of sharing within the host community, within the Jewish community. And there is this priority of Jewish mission within the bigger picture of world mission. And I think that's really an important point. I mean, that's why I'm working with the church's ministry among Jewish people, because we're trying to encourage the church to see the priority and the responsibility and the privilege of sharing the gospel within the Jewish community. So there is this ongoing, I believe, priority of Jewish focused work alongside focused work for the whole of God's creation. So Paul is very keen to talk about first for the Jew and then for the Gentile. And then the final part of this verse is where this section is where Paul introduces verse 17, where he talks about that the gospel brings forth a righteousness from God is shown, is revealed. There's something here which has been opened up. God is revealing his purposes. And a righteousness comes by faith. Faith in the person and work of Jesus. And that faith is transformative. And the quotation there is from the book of Habakkuk. And later on in Romans, Paul quotes from Abraham. And again here, in Genesis 15, we see Abraham's, righteousness, which comes through trusting, through faith in God. So there's a real lot of teaching in these opening verses of Romans. And I encourage you, if you have time over the next few weeks, to look at some of these references here. You may want to read, for example, the book of Habakkuk and see how this verse from Habakkuk kind of fits into his wider prophecy. I think also there's a link in my mind between Habakkuk in the Old Testament and the book of Jonah, equally in the Old Testament. And again, to read Jonah, I think gives a kind of context to some of the issues here in Romans. And again, read about Abraham, read about his journey of faith, read about the covenant which God made with him, with Abraham, and the importance of faith. So there's a lot here, and I know you're at the church here in Haverhill, you're hoping to do some more studies through Romans, both during Lent and in the months ahead. And I know you're going to be using my little book, 60 Days with Romans, as a kind of resource. I hope that's helpful to you. And if you've got particular questions or comments you want to make, if you contact one of your deacons, Peter Salmons, he can bring those questions and comments to me, and I'll do my best to respond. But thank you for listening today. And if you listened last week as well, I hope you've got an overview now of the first 17 verses of Romans. And I hope it's an encouragement for you. So just a reminder, think about thankfulness. Who and what are you thankful for? Think about how I can be giving and receiving from my church community. And have confidence in the gospel. It is a power of God. It's like dynamite. To the Jew first, and equally for the whole world. What a privilege Paul has to be an ambassador for the gospel. And you and I, if we've given our lives to Jesus, despite our weaknesses, despite our fragility, we are part of a community of people who have the privilege of living out and sharing the gospel. And that is a high calling and a huge privilege. So thanks for listening, and God bless you.